So what do you think is going on inside Boris Johnson's head right now?
I think what he's done is take charge this weekend of a situation that was out of his control and drifting, inevitably towards a very, very unhappy and undignified sort of conclusion. And so, if you like, he's gone jumping in, waving Union Jacks, if you like, rather than be dragged kicking and screaming out of Parliament. And though I won't join those who openly criticise the process and all that, I do understand why he feels understandably aggrieved by the process that has not only taken him out of office, stopped him being Prime Minister, but now hounded him out of politics. Because, as you rightly said, he is a man who defied political gravity and only a couple of years ago, a few years ago, won the biggest majority for 40 years. And so I think those people who voted Conservative, most of them having never contemplated voting Conservative before, it was very much a personalised Boris-branded pitch at the last election, will feel aggrieved that the man who they wanted as Prime Minister is now not even in Parliament, not to mention in number 10.
I want to get into some of those processes a bit later in the interview. He dramatically quit his seat for now. Do you think he's going to be back?
You never know. He keeps, he deliberately leaves us guessing, doesn't he? Hasta la vista, baby, or, more classical references. It's virtually impossible to write him off. But I don't think this is part of an elaborate plot to sort of destabilise and topple Rishi Sunak. I think Boris Johnson feels that there is an opportunity for him now to go off and, lick his wounds, but also sees new opportunities. He's a very talented person. He's in demand around the world as a speaker. He's writing his memoirs. He's a great writer. So there's a little time for him to be out of the fray. But will he come back one day? Who knows?
In other words, then, is it because he thinks he would lose the by-election in his seat?
I think
why, really?
It's a little bit. None of us wants to interview for our own job. And we certainly want to be interviewed for our own job under the most appalling circumstances, where a committee led, frankly, by a woman who I've got a lot of respect for, but among the many jobs that Harriet Harman has done in the past, has been leading the Labour Party. She was deputy leader of the Labour Party for a long time. Can you imagine any Labour supporter being happy if someone like William Hague, shall we say, had the fate of Keir Starmer in his hands when he was caught drinking beer and having curry with friends a long way from home in the middle of lockdown? I don't think people would be comfortable with that process, nor should they be. And so I understand why Boris feels aggrieved, and I understand why a lot of people watching this will think, whoa, so a committee led by the former Labour leader can actually hound Boris out of office, when the police actually found him guilty of one minor misdemeanour that was worth a 50 quid fine.
At the same time, it's not just Harriet Harman, though, is it? It's a cross-party group. There's a majority of Conservatives on that committee. Yeah,
that doesn't, that's often worse than having your political opponents there as people from the same party. As you know better than most, Sophie, there's so many cross-currents in a party, and, so I don't think that having a Conservative majority means that your well-being is safeguarded.
It also had to be voted through by the House as well, so he's assuming that a considerable number of people on his own side wouldn't back him too.
I think he's just thinking, the true test in a democracy is whether the people vote for you. 14 million people voted for him, pretty much, at the last election. They voted for MPs, but it was very much...
He could have gone to vote in Uxbridge then, couldn't he? That would be the ultimate
test. Well, he could have done, but again, in the situation when you are standing in a by-election under these sort of circumstances where people are reading that you've lied to Parliament because the former leader of the Labour Party has decided that you did, it's not ideal to have to reapply for your own job. So I don't blame him at all for just saying, basta così, enough is enough, I'm out of here.
Have you spoken to him?
I speak to him from time to time, I think he is enjoying, life beyond politics. His personal life is in a great place. He's going to be a father again very, very soon, and he's travelling the world. So
and earning quite a bit of money as well.
Yeah, which he hasn't done for most of his life.
Now, we talked a bit about the Partygate inquiry. The other strand of this is the honours that Boris Johnson put forward and this meeting between Rishi Sunak and Boris Johnson. We heard from Grant Shapps saying that actually Rishi Sunak didn't get involved in the process. It was all completely kosher above board. Perhaps Boris Johnson didn't understand the details of what was happening.
Like Grant, I wasn't in the room, so I don't know what happened at that meeting. But as I understand it, there's been a lot of toing and froing about this list. And I think the relevant authorities were not happy with the scale of it and some of the nominations originally. what is nice about the final list is I look at colleagues who I've known for a long, long time, people who put in an enormous shift at City Hall, 8 years at the mayoralty, people whose names you probably don't know, certainly most of the audience don't, but Boris has, in this list, taken care of a whole load of, decent men and women who put in an enormous shift without fame nor fortune. And these people are important to keep the show on the road. And if we think that politics matters, then we've got to be a little bit less contemptuous of people engage in politics, whether they're in the back room or front of house.
You were on the list?
Yes, but the real honour for me was having a chance to serve in number 10 last year. It was brutal, it was pretty rough, but it was also very important. And Boris led the world in helping Zelensky stand up to Putin in the Ukraine. He helped lead Britain out of COVID. And unfortunately, we crashed into a cost of living crisis and he got wrestling with that. He was wrestling with energy policy. There was all this stuff going on. And yet, if you turned on the television, with some exceptions, most of the time, all you would hear was this constant myopic diet of partygate this, partygate that, partygate this, partygate that. And so he never had a fair hearing, I don't think, last year. Now, some of that was partly of his own making, but, some things happened before I got there. But I think there was an awful lot to be proud of that happened last year, and a lot for people like Boris to feel aggrieved of, that it was basically taken away from him.
I mean, you were there in an absolute roller coaster of a time, weren't you?
Yeah.
What do you think was the maddest day, the most difficult day?
Funny enough, the moment where I thought it was lost was when the party, when those who managed the Conservative Party told Boris that they did not want to oppose this Labour motion to set up the Privileges Committee. Because for me, we had already had a police investigation, we had the Sue Gray inquiry, there'd been a vote of confidence in Boris, which he won, 2/3 of the party backed him. So I thought, surely at this point, we can just move on and focus on what we need to do to address the concerns of voters rather than the obsessions of the Twitterati and,
I do just want to come back because when we talk about Partygate, I get a lot of people saying, this is a huge part of our life. We couldn't see loved ones. We lost people without saying goodbye to them.
And that goes for him as well.
Boris Johnson...
He lost his mother, I lost my sister. It's this narrative that somehow out there people were suffering and in here they were partying. They were not partying, full pelt. They were working hard. And he got a 50 quid fine. Now, that would be the end of the matter for a civilian, but in Boris Johnson's case, something that the police, with all their powers of investigation, all the due process and the thoroughness with which they check things out, found him guilty of something worthy of a 50 quid fine. Since then, he's been hounded out of office as Prime Minister and now hounded out of Parliament. I mean, in terms of proportionality, if he was a civilian, that would be unfair.
Does he blame Rishi Sunak?
I don't think he blames Rishi Sunak, for much of this. He was very disappointed at the time that Rishi Sunak did not even tell him face-to-face that he was resigning. I mean, because the other person who resigned on that day, Sajid Javid, did. He was, man enough, if you like, to go and see Boris and tell him to his face, I'm resigning, I can't stand this anymore. We discovered on the telly that Rishi had gone. So, but in the end, the whole party, or a big chunk of the party, turned against Boris. And that's the reality he's had to wrestle with. But the reason that they did that is because they couldn't see any other way of stopping this miserable purgatory of turning on the telly every day, and all they would see is stuff about Partygate. And so they decided in the end, whether it's fair or not, that they just couldn't carry on with that.
The relationship between Rishi Sunak and Boris Johnson is obviously pretty toxic, right?
Well, I sat down with him every morning, about 8:15 for 7 months of my life. Felt like a lot longer. And actually, I was surprised when I got there because I had not met Rishi Sunak, but the personal chemistry was very, very warm. The two of them got on really well. There's good banter.
That was at one time. It's now changed.
Well, yeah, but what I'm saying is I don't think it's a personal thing. I think it's, Rishi is now doing the job that Boris used to do. Now, none of us feel very good about people doing that if it's been forced upon us. I always saw Rishi as the natural successor, but many, many years down the line. And actually, he cut to the chase, though actually he wasn't the beneficiary of the toppling of Boris. It was Liz Truss. But he's eventually ended up in power, and I wish him well, because at this point in time, it is the only game in town. And any Conservative who thinks that prolonging the agony, prolonging the pain, prolonging the division, dancing on Boris's political grave, or undermining Rishi Sunak is mad.
Do you think there's any way of patching up these warring sides?
Yes, because I think in the end, what we now have is very different. We don't have the charisma, we don't have the connection, we don't have that unique kind of appeal.
So Rishi Sunak
Boris
isn't
has.
as charismatic, you're saying?
Oh, clearly not. But he's hardworking, he's clean living, he beavers away, and he does details. So the two of them, for me, were a perfect tag team. You know, they complemented each other's skills very, very well. Now, going into a general election with Rishi will have certain disadvantages versus Boris, particularly when you're appealing to working class blokes across, you know, swathes of the north of England and the north of my native country, Wales, where
Why do you think?
blue. Because they'll miss that oomph and panache and alpha maledom, I guess. But on the other hand, when you're looking at the choice between Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak, you sort of think, well, actually, if what we need is somebody who's capable and competent and hardworking, then why change? You've got Rishi in there. He's young, he's bright, he's well qualified, particularly to handle the economy, and he's teetotal.
OK. Well, that is one thing that he differs to Boris Johnson, I guess. Now, just finally, you know, we've been talking about the interview there. You've been in the eye of the storm as Director of Communications. How are you finding life on the outside?
I've just been reliving some of my number 10 days because I've done this podcast, Unprecedented, and I urge, I'm sure you've listened to it, but I urge anyone who wants to understand what really happened to have a listen, because last year was portrayed in sort of polarised, extreme ways, and there was a lot more subtlety to it, there was a lot more texture to it. And so I've been reliving that, but otherwise, yeah, I'm doing a lot more shifts with the RNLI, where I'm a volunteer on the Thames, hopefully progressing my training there, because I skimped on my shifts last year, and a lot more time for, you know, family and friends.
Always good. Thank you very much indeed for coming on the programme today. Thank you.
you.
Good to talk.